So, hello and welcome everyone to the first fall MIRI Seminar on Current Affairs. My name is Svetluša Surova and I'm the Director and Senior Researcher at Minority Issues Research Institute. MIRI is an independent, non-partisan think tank headquartered in Bratislava, Slovakia. And we are doing research on minority issues, but we also support human and minority rights worldwide. And to work towards more equal, inclusive, and just future, we encourage cooperation between scientists, researchers, practitioners, and minorities from various backgrounds. And at the MIRI, we are very excited to begin a new fall semester with a seminar focusing on anti-government protests in Serbia, their impact, challenges, and minority perspective. It's my great honor and pleasure to open this seminar. The protests are not only the object of the study of the social movement studies, they are essential for citizens' participation in democracy. Through demonstrations, citizens can express their views, dissent, and make demands to authorities. They are a tool for bringing political, social, or cultural change. The protest in Serbia started as a peaceful vigils for the victims of collapsed railway station in Novi Sad, which killed 16 people. Protesters are calling for accountability for corruption, justice for the victims, and even now preliminary elections. Although they began mostly peacefully, the demonstrations have since turned violent. And during the summer, the police and parapolice structures started to use extraordinary force to quell the protests in Novi Pazar, where members of Bošnjak national minority predominantly live, and in Bački Petrovac where members of Slovak national minority predominantly live. So these practices has raised a huge concern and urged us at MIRI to address the issue of protest here and also from minority perspective. As Ella Wheeler, Wilcox's American poet and journalist, said in her poem titled Protest, "To sin by silence when we should protest makes cowards out of men." This poem was composed right before the First World War broke out and at the height of the women's suffrage movement. It represented a mobilizing anthem against silence. And I think that it can be used today in regard to the silence that we hear from the international community, international organizations, especially European Union and member states, to the brutal repression of one of the biggest student-led movements in Europe since the second half of 20th century, demanding regime change in Serbia. About this very important and timely topic, we will be discussing today with our distinguished guests, Sabina Pačariz, Assistant Professor of Politics and International Relations at Northeastern University London, and Aleksandar Pavlović, Researcher at Institute for Philosophy and Social Theory, University of Belgrade. The seminar will be moderated by our senior researcher, Dr. Mirsad Kriješterac. Thank you all for your time and willingness to be with us today. The seminar will cover the nature of students and citizens' protests, the different contexts that they take place, their goals, impact on society and politics, especially from minority perspective. After the discussion, the floor will be open for the questions from the audience. I encourage everybody to engage in discussion. You can ask the questions or make comments. However, I would kindly ask all our participants when asking questions or making comments to introduce themselves and state affiliation. We expect all participants to show respect for the views of others, and I strongly invite you to exercise decorum and avoid abusive or disrespectful language or derogatory and inflammatory remarks. Thank you very much for your understanding and cooperation. Let's start. I give the floor to Mirsad now.
Thank you, Svetluša, and hello everyone from South Florida. It is great that we have this discussion today about the protests in Serbia, and our guests are joining us from Great Britain and Belgrade, Serbia. From London, we have Dr. Sabina Pačariz. Her research focuses on authoritarian regimes and democratic resilience, along with the issues relating to identities and belonging of or among minority communities, with main empirical focus on Southeastern Europe. She wrote and published works on Muslim Bosniaks of Sanjak, a historical region stretched on both sides of the border between Montenegro and Serbia. And our second guest is Dr. Aleksandar Pavlović, and he's joining us from Belgrade, Republic of Serbia. His main research focus regionally is also on Southeastern Europe, where he studies cultural history of the region, Serb-Albanian relations, Serb oral history and traditions, and traditional Balkan societies. And he also published numerous works on these topics. We are happy to have both of you with us today, and let's start our conversation by providing an overview of the protests for people who might not be familiar with the details about them. So, Dr. Pavlović, can you give us a brief overview about the ongoing protests in Serbia, how they started, who is protesting, and what are the demands of the protesters?
Thank you. I assume that people who joined have at least a general knowledge. So I don't want to take more time. I want to have time for the discussion and more concrete questions. So I'll just provide telegraphic few points in the next few minutes. Basically, the protest started after on the 10 months ago, after 1st of November, when the canopy collapsed in Belgrade. It was a canopy of the newly refurbished train station in Novi Sad. And the problem was that it was basically a huge government project, soaking a lot of money, involving a Chinese company and being part of this whole Silk and Road initiative of connecting Thessaloniki and Budapest and international project. So this train station was opened at least once or twice by the highest government officials. It was praised as, something of the highest value, and unfortunately, the canopy just refurbished fell and collapsed and killed 14 people. Then subsequently 2 more died. This sparked citizen protests and student protests, and by the end of November, they got a very specific shape, which I think is partially the reason why the protests were of such magnitude, and I would say successful. And that is the canopy collapsed around noon. So what became a habit is that people gather in silence around the time when the canopy fell, 11:53 or something, and then give basically silence for 14 minutes, and then as the number of victims increased, the number of minutes increased. So this was the essential form that the protests have, and that is still going on in many places in Serbia. People locally gather on the main street or some public space. They block the traffic for 16 minutes and give silence to the victims. This is the form, the initial, the capillary form that the protests have. And as the time was going by, more and more places joined the protest. I don't have an exact figure, but you can see that Serbia is a comparatively small country with, let's say, 6.5, 6.8 million people. We have recorded protests in over 500 places. So on hundreds of places, they are still going on in this form. And just an hour ago, these capillary protests were happening in main squares in Belgrade, in Novi Sad, but also throughout Serbia. By December 2024, the protests were really getting like getting more and more in numbers. The students picked up. They became the strongest and leading force of the protest. They formulated 4 rather simple demands, and that is that dismissal of government officials responsible for the collapse, prosecution of those involved, publication of all documents related to the whole work and everything happening, the contracts and everything happening with the refurbishment of the station. And the 4th one was the increase of the budget for higher education for 20%. These demands are still formally the 4 demands that are ongoing and that the protesters are asking to be met in order to conclude the protest. So basically, accountability of institutions for this this tragedy. With students who faced violence from the police and this parapolice, state forces, the students basically declared a blockade already in December, and I think for the first time in the history of Belgrade University, the university unilaterally, all faculties, the assembly of the all faculties of the Senate, they immediately responded by supporting the student demands. And that effectively led to a full blockade of the university that was going on until basically June, July this year. We can talk more about the present situation. Important thing is, at the moment, there is some kind of online classes, some kind of, let's say, almost improvised deadlines for the students to enable them to pass their exams. But at the faculties, there are still protests, and most of the central buildings of each faculty are still occupied by students, and they are there 24 hours, and they are de facto still in protest. This was followed by a huge support from the public. The biggest rally was, in a way, the culmination of the whole protest was on the 15th of March in Belgrade, with over 300,000 people being present. These are quite reliable figures that I am mentioning, and this is certainly in any recent history of Serbia the largest anti-government protest. None of the protests against Milosevic, which were huge, which lasted for a long time, which involved many people, had strong energy. None of those events ever gathered such huge number of people. Again, I don't want to go into details, but there are academic works saying that if you have 3% people on the streets, this is basically an overwhelming support, and that in any, I would say, any decent rule should respond to that. Okay, this is organized by Slovakia. We had in 1989 protests in Prague and in Slovakia. After a few days, communist nomenclature saw huge numbers and said, okay, we should think about the exit strategy. Now, with the government not meeting these demands, the protest continued. Obviously, it requires a lot of energy. It takes time. It drags on. So protests got different shapes and forms. It is important to emphasize that the student protests were supported by University of Belgrade and generally public universities, which went basically on strike for months. Teachers, high school teachers, elementary school teachers also had the strongest strike that the Serbian educational system ever saw. At some points, over 80% of schools were either completely closed or had strong forms of strike. and this was all part of the, we can say that the educational system, whether higher students or elementary education, was on the in the front rows of the protest. So the next big rally was on 28th of June. It gathered around 140, 150,000, which is again, okay, despite the idea that the protests are, lowering, the energy is not there, like people are tired and so on. Again, like one call from the students and well-organized protest brought 140, 150,000 people on the streets. Compare it to the numbers who were against Milosevic, we are still talking about massive public energy that is ongoing. Four demands, as I said, were still not met. Protests are ongoing. We have occasionally evening rallies that have slightly different forms. We have more frequent clashes between the protesters and the police. We've seen recently, let's say, more agonal or antagonistic clashes between the, let's say, football fans or those who are more of a hooligan nature on the side of protesters. We have government responding with their measures, and I will basically stop here and let Sabina and Mirsad take over into some other subjects. I would just like to conclude that in terms of democratic engagement, apart from civil disobedience and huge public outcry for changes, the protests have their formal demands. Of course, they are of a wider nature. They are addressing a widespread corruption in the Serbian society and also authoritarian rule. What the students did and some of their actions that were among the strongest and most visible, they also cycled to Strasbourg, to the Court of Justice, to make an appeal. They also had a marathon to Brussels to submit their demands. So I've heard many times students don't wear European flags. They don't carry any flags. It is a landmark of this protest. But in terms of demanding institutional accountability, rule of law, fighting against corruption, we can see what is the natural homeland of their values and which values do they promote. They generally promote the values, the basic values of democracy. That will be one thing. And in organizational sense, what caused many problems for the government is that, unlike previous protests, these protests are not really personified in a couple of leaders. So we have something called plenum, which is basically local capillary participation of students in the form of assemblies at their faculties, where they, within the limits of a set time, make decisions collectively, and then basically the decisions of the plenum joined together become the voice of university. It's not voiced by leaders or anything, and their students are also promoting these forms of direct democracy among the people as well. So we have something called Zbor, which is basically like popular assemblies, which they exist in the Serbian constitution, but they don't have real power. However, in my area, I live in New Belgrade. In these municipalities, I can say that citizens' assembly became a rather popular form of gathering where people make decisions, what they demands, and it shows on the streets because these areas like New Belgrade and Zemun usually have a very, very strong turnout. So, as I said, I will really stop here. We have an ongoing situation. We have something that could be best described as if the First World War was a war of attrition, we could say that this where we have a government trying the strategy of attrition, hoping that if things drag on, the energy will collapse, people will eventually get on with their businesses. But the situation is extraordinary, and the protest is there, whether it's of the same magnitude every day, but events are happening, things are still ongoing, and we have a pretty similar contested agonal situation in Serbia that has been going on from November.
Well, thank you, Dr. Pavlović, for this overview. I was thinking as you talk, like, it must be some deeper issues that are essentially driving that many people to come on the streets and demand some action. And in your conclusion, you pointed to them. It's actually about the corruption and the rule of law and accountability, where the collapse of the station was just a trigger point for people to come on the streets and ask for this. So now, Dr. Pačariz, considering your expertise on authoritarian regimes and democratic resilience, what is your assessment regarding the issues that trigger these protests? And is it a problem of political regime, or is it a problem of just like a bad governance?
Thank you very much. Thank you to our hosts. Pleasure to be here. Is it just the government or is the regime? I mean, definitely both, especially if the government is authoritarian. Formally, that would be a hybrid regime, but as years pass on, we see deeper and deeper entrenchment and moving closer to authoritarianism, and very strong control of all institutions, formal institutions. But what's interesting in authoritarian regimes, that they actually have a very strong network of informal institutions that keep everything in check. We already mentioned the parapolice forces who are in close cooperation with the police. There is control over many institutions. So basically, when you have an authoritarian government, the way how should I say, the way various positions in institutions are given, the way judges are nominated, the way the heads of representative bodies are appointed, is not via accountability, which we would have in a democratic regime, but here the currency is loyalty. So only loyals get certain positions. So if you look at face value, this is one of the key traits of hybrid regimes. If you look at face value, you have functional democracy, you have representative bodies, you have judges of different kinds, positions of different kinds, all these necessary institutions. But the question is, how do they actually function? And this is what we see, this is what the protests are questioning. This is where the quest for accountability comes from. And I need to mention here that this frustration with the regime that we are seeing so widely through the protest, it's not new. It's just that the student protests maybe managed to, how should I say, to punch higher. Because there were protests before, there were expressions of frustration with the regime. There were certain green activist movements, then movements from the opposition. The citizens, certain groups of citizens challenged the elections. Didn't want to participate in the elections because the elections were not fair. We even had international observers commenting that. So that's where, when we are dealing with an authoritarian regime, we have to be, how should I say, cautious and equipped to look beyond what's at face value and how things work. And this is, the problem with implementation of law, of practicing law. It's not that what the students are looking for is not some new law. It's not creating a new, I don't know, legal framework. They're calling upon the Constitution. They're calling upon the already existing legal framework, which is fine. But the problem is, how does the government implement it? Is it selectively? Is it according to rewarding, penalizing the loyals, or is it equal for all citizens? And this is what, we can stretch this in various directions. I just don't want to keep stretching the conversation. But what is definitely interesting about the student protests is that they managed to mobilize more or less all of society. We did have protests. We did have expressions of, how should I say, of discontent even before, but none of these managed to, how should I say, mobilize more of society. But what the student protests did very differently, very successfully, I would argue, is mobilize cross-ethnically, to mobilize cross-generationally, different professions. We have, I don't know, high school teachers joining, we have lawyers joining, we have veterans, who would expect war veterans, if we know the history of the leadership, that we have a former radical leading the country, Mr. Aleksandar Vučić, who would have expected that veterans would challenge somebody who was a promoter of nationalistic ideology. So this is where things are different. And if I would pull a parallel to the 90s, to the protests of the 90s, as Dr. Pavlović said already, these are much wider protests. I think I read somewhere or heard somewhere that there were 23,000 registered protests, and this is some data from Serbian formal governmental institution. And these protests are actually managing to mobilize much wider cross-ethnically. If I have to drive attention to the region of Sanjak, of Novi Pazar, we did not have such wide participation the way we see them widely included now. I'll stop here and let you guide us in specific directions.
Thank you, Dr. Pačariz. We're going to bring in that minority perspective. But based on what we heard, Dr. Pavlović, protests eventually also made a demand for early elections. So now lots of people in the region, not only in Serbia, they all have somewhat expressed sympathies toward protesters, but they are wondering, can elections really alleviate underlying political problems in Serbia? Since, as we were just talking about, elections will change the government, while many of the issues that trigger the protests may essentially stay there. Because as Dr. Pačariz say, and I think you agree, these are not all new issues. We just reached the boiling point when population cannot take it anymore. But these are the issues that people in Serbia were complaining for a while, and now, they are right there in the front of our eyes to resolve them. But so can the election solve the problem? Or, how should people in the region and outside view it? Is really what will be what do you think will be the best way to resolve the problems? You need to turn the mic on. Yeah.
I'm hesitant to provide, intellectuals are good to problematize things, not to provide solutions. But let me put it in the simplest way so we can have more of the dynamic form. The best solution at the beginning, in the first months of the protest, was for the government to fill the demands, and it was doable. Even for this authoritarian government, I believe you know, there is the Balkan autocrats can last for long if they have some pragmatics as well. And Gruevski and Milo, they had this pragmatism, and Vučić has it. So it was possible to do it. Okay, it's about one particular event, you know, let's follow it through, let's pretend that we have institutions, and if we meet the demands, okay. This is what was different about this protest. It wasn't overly political at the beginning, you know. We are students, we want this situation solved, and we want our institutions to respond. This is not about, you know, president and so on. So that was one possible solution. Unfortunately, authoritarian regimes, and I think Vučić is in his terminal stage, they can't respond to criticism, to challenge in any way but through force and smear campaign of anyone who thinks differently. Okay, so that was one solution. Now, unfortunately, there is hesitation for months between students and opposition and citizens what to do. But I don't see a more peaceful and better way to resolve the situation, but through general elections. And this is what for months students and citizens are asking. Not because all of them, and I should say all of us, wanted this from the onset, but after 6 months of huge civil pressures, okay, for the government to do a simple thing, you know, and the government refusing, for anyone, it was a sign, clear sign that the only way to resolve the issue is through change of government. Okay, and many people are saying, well, Vučić will not allow free elections, which is in itself right. We will never have properly free elections where people have, you know, where people can have informed, to make informed judgment, where they can have a relatively balanced level of information, argumentation for one side, the other side. No, but even in this situation, I, as many of my compatriots, don't see an easier way but to have elections to challenge this government with all their, how should I say, with all the power that they have, with all the unfair rules that are in place, still to challenge them, because if what popular protests showed is that they hardly have any legitimacy. And I think the best proof is that Vučić is not allowing elections. He was the guy who always wanted elections. You know, for him, elections were solution to any issues. Now he is suddenly being shy, and that's it. I am, as I say, I believe in democracy like people believe in you know, spiritual things and so on. So any other solution is worse. You know, Churchill, like democracy is the worst form of government except any other form of government. So this is the bad solution, that we have general elections and students need to go, you know, to have their own party and so on, or student political list. But any other solution is a worse solution.
Okay, thank you. Yeah, this was essentially a question that I was hoping to lead us into that opening where we can bring in the issues with minorities, given the focus of our institute. But, you know, I cannot resist, because I'm listening to you and considering your expertise, Dr. Pavlović, on cultural history, right? As far as I could notice, there's kind of an interesting shift in that, how you say, discourse that the current elites are holding. You know, historically, traditionally, we were used to hearing discourse from the Serb political leaders on Serbian people. But now we can hear the shift towards Serbian state. So that's kind of how do you view this culturally? Like, is this some real change, or maybe that's not that relevant? That shift from focusing on people to focusing on state, as the current government or other leader is essentially kind of trying to frame the discussion about we need to maintain the strong state, while, as I said, historically, usually leaders were referring to Serbian people.
I don't see here a huge difference. Now, the popular movement that Vučić was announcing for years is the movement for the nation and the state, za narod I državu. And you know, in Slavic languages, narod is something between people and the nation. You know, there is not such a thing. So, you know, let's say that maybe here the focus is that the state is endangered, because if the state is the focal point, you say that basically this is the Orange Revolution, coup d'etat, foreign mercenaries, and so on. So this is, in a way, more politically lucrative for the authoritarian leader to present this as an attack on the state in the form of a revolution financed from abroad. You know, it's easier to sell it as a political message. If in any case there was anything resembling, like let's say some unsettlement among the minorities in Serbia, I'm sure they would dress it up the same day as attack on the Serbian nation and so on. It's just that it's easier to to fight this, and you know, like, it's not so easy to make a message about this being against the Serbian people when, you know, it's overwhelmingly the Serbian people that are on the streets, you know.
Yeah, that's why I was asking. Yeah, exactly, because that kind of interesting shift. All right, that's helpful, at least to me. So now, as we were leading into that, protests were eventually joined by some of those national minorities in Serbia. And we saw, although we have to be transparent and say the government had a quite heavy-handed crackdown throughout the country, but it feels different when they were used against the national minorities. So we saw government heavy-handed response to the peaceful protests among minorities, national minorities, not only Novi Pazar, but also against Slovaks in Bečki Petrovac. And we're going to have a separate conversation about that very soon, with the deployment of gendarmerie and the riot police. And this, thus far, we didn't hear much from other minority groups in Serbia, but participation, or the perception, is that dissatisfaction is indeed widespread, as we heard from both speakers, and the protests can spread to other minority groups, like Albanians in Preševo and Bujanovac. I actually spoke with some activists there to invite them for today's conversation, but they couldn't attend. They said we will hopefully hear from them soon, from Bulgarians and others. Now, these protests are not strictly related to minority rights. Nevertheless, minorities do have some own specific issues they're including in their protest demands. And so how these demands are received by other protesters, Dr. Pačariz, can you speak about that? You know, what happened when minorities made their own specific minority-related issues, although protests, as you both said very well, are not necessarily related to these issues, but you know, each group may have its own demands, right? How they're received by other protesters.
Yes, so I'll speak about the situation in Novi Pazar, and I will again emphasize that we have to look everything through the authoritarian lens. What do I mean by that? That is to continuously pay attention to the clientelist network. That means whoever is at the position of, let's say, more position that's maybe more salient, such as a dean of a university or any other maybe representative institution. Not necessarily representative institution, but if it's some kind of party that participates in the government or has good connection with the regimes, it's very likely that loyalty will be the way this is tied together. What does that mean? That means that the representative, how should I say, the head of the representative body might be of the quote-unquote right ethnicity, but that does not mean that they will serve the interests of the minority. And we can unpack that through the case of Novi Pazar. The problems with the university in Novi Pazar are much older than the student protests across Serbia. In Novi Pazar, we had the dean of the University of Novi Pazar, who comes from the Bosniak community, who has been dean for, I think, more than 3 years. I might get the numbers wrong, but the exact numbers wrong. But her policies actually brought to slow, how should I say, really worked against the interest of the Bosniak minority group. Slowly, certain departments started closing down to the point of closing down the study group on Bosnian language and culture. To dismissing academics, to pushing academics to lose their positions, to lose their jobs. Many of them were from the Bosniak community, not all of them, but many qualified academics who were not loyal to the dean were basically either sacked or pushed to leave, and then in their place were brought other retired professors just to keep the university alive. And how should I say, the frustration of this group is much older than the student protests. They were facing issues for a much longer period, and it just how should I say, happened to explode at the same time. And unfortunately, the dean of the University of Novi Pazar, together with several loyal academics, is the only one who joined Chatsiland, the tents where Vučić came. It's like one of the very few academics who stood on the other side, on the side of government. This is why we need to have this understanding that just having quote unquote the right ethnicity, just belonging to a certain minority group, does not mean that the interests of the community are served. And this should not be taken naively. This is for the regime, this has a particular purpose. This is very good, how should I say, window dressing technique. Because minority issues, minority concessions, they are all these, how should I say, maybe bullet points, or let's say a checklist to present in front of the EU, to present some kind of, well, to be honest, some kind of minimal democratic quality, to show that we have inclusion, that we have all these bodies, that here is this university, here is the dean, etc. But what we are saying, what we're seeing now with the protests, with, let's say, with the wide inclusion in the protests of the Bosniak minority, is that they say, no, it's a clientelist regime, we don't accept this, we're seeking accountability, we want functional institutions, formal institutions, we want a meritocratic system. And they're basically including themselves in the debate. And what's very interesting, what we're seeing through the case of Novi Pazar, the University of Novi Pazar, it's not only that they themselves are widely included, widely identifying themselves with the Serbian state, which was very difficult during the 90s, during the very strong nationalistic, how should I say, ideology in the 90s. Now we see them widely included, but also embraced from the majoritarian group. We see them stepping in, I think the students from Novi Pazar stepped in to blockade Serbian TV, Serbian national television during Easter holidays. Then when they went to visit other cities like Niš, Kragujevac, where wide protests were organized, they organized for them, how should I say, dinners, observation of their religious, how should I say, affiliations. Then we saw one wide protest hosted in Novi Pazar where people from other communities came, academics, students. So this is a very interesting dynamic to observe, to see this inclusion on a grassroots level. We see on grassroots level a very different dynamic, very different perceptions of identity, who we are, what kind of state do we want, who will be part of the state, who will be making decisions, etc.
That
Can I,
indeed was quite an interesting thing to see, these expressions of solidarity that cross all the, how you say, boundaries, or all the previous entrenched group boundaries, right? Quite something new, and that lots of people in the region notice that. Those who observe Serbian politics for a long time notice that kind of very, very strong solidarity among groups. But that clientelistic regime mentality, right, does therefore presents also additional problems for minorities because they don't really have the adequate representation, even though on the surface, the President Vučić's parties did incorporate minorities in governing structures, but we see that minorities are not really satisfied with that. Now, I would like to ask Dr. Pavlović and then also open the floor for questions. So anybody of you who want to ask questions, please feel free to either type it or just raise the hand icon and we'll have you. But I was to ask Dr. Pavlović that thing that he said in the conclusion. It's a very important point because, as he said, a lot of people are saying why they don't fly the European flags and all these things. But it is clear that protesters are asking for those values upon which European integrations are built, like rule of law, transparency, and so. But there is still a silence. Even in Slovakia, our home place for our institute, the politicians were muted to the response, the heavy-handed response by Serbian police. And so how do we understand that? The protesters did everything they could. They walked, they biked all the way from Serbia to Brussels, and they came back. So how is that viewed? Let's put it that way. How is that viewed from the Serbian perspective, Dr. Pavlović? How do people in Serbia view this, how you say, absence of the European Union in this whole effort to improve things in Serbia?
I believe it has grossly negative consequences for the potential future of the protest and the outcome of what's going on. I personally consider that this government lost its legitimacy and they will sooner or later be gone. Okay? The real question is how long and how terrible can they resist, so that what's the damage that will be done in terms of Milosevic lost support at least in 1996. He held on through some deals and, stealing elections and so on for 4 years. So this is the question. And another question is, how deeply can we really transform the society? If we just change the nomenclature, that's it. So this has strong detrimental effect. If these students who demanded basic democratic rights, if they witnessed a strong vocal support by Western European leaders, it would be a strong symbolical message of where EU really stands in terms of values. Okay? Now, I'd like to say something. The Althusserian idea of ideology. Ideology is not so much what you profess, it's how you act. I advise you, don't look so much into what the loudest shout. Look at what people are really doing. You won't see EU flags, but they are going, as I said, to Brussels, to Strasbourg, demanding institutions. In the 90s, one thing was clear. First, there was strong support for independent media. And in the media sense, situation in Milosevic's time was better for the opposition than it is now. And the second thing is it was like the direct support of all democratic leaders for the democratic forces. Students feel that they are left alone. Citizens feel that they are left alone, that there is strong support for Vučić, and this will, in a way, this will create an anti-Western sentiment, anti-EU sentiment, and this is why if you want, the sentiment of many people and the future of Serbia could go right, and that is not where we are headed. Zizek wrote one piece when he said this is the lowest point of Europe. Europe has lower points in its foreign policy and so on. But in the symbolical sense, I understand the argument. How can you not stand strongly in support of these young people? Svetlusha said this is probably the strongest student movement probably since 1968, in Europe. So yes, people question the true, genuine will of EU leadership for the real transformation of Serbia. And we don't need to be nationalists to understand that in the Western Balkans, Serbia occupies a central position, and if Serbia has a good democratic transformation, it is certainly going to have a positive effect on the situation around. I'd like to say a few things, if you please allow me, just about minorities, if it's okay.
Please go ahead. You have
I believe
particularly important part to add,
Yeah.
because you are expert on the Serb-Albanian relations.
I prefer you call me Sasha and you treat me as a member of general public. This is how I'd like to present my perspective. I believe in this Althusserian sense, look at what is going on in the ground. I believe minorities are very important, and again, this is a glimpse into a optimistic, positive possibility of some optimism in that relation. First, I think it's important that the tragedy happened in Novi Sad, which is the capital of autonomous province of Vojvodina, which is ethnically diverse. I didn't look at the surnames and certificates of the people who died and who were injured, but certainly not all of them were, from Serbian background. And because in Novi Sad you have certain long tradition of tolerance, and if you want, of decency, this event sparked strong sentiments because there is some kind of tolerance and decency among the people, and it spread around Vojvodina, which is, as I said, ethnically diverse. So that was one ethnic element. Symbolically, the Serbian students marching to Novi Pazar, which is usually considered as like, a no man's land, like the end of the earth, and the other side. That was symbolically huge, and students from Novi Pazar and people from Novi Pazar paid the visit again. I can tell you from the circles where I go around, there was a call in Belgrade. The students have these applications to host students and people from Novi Pazar. I think if entire Novi Pazar came on that day to Belgrade, they would have been hosted. Like there was such a will, and maybe it's not pleasant to hear, but there was a war veteran, a representative of a war veteran association, who said, kids, we went to war against your compatriot, against Bosniaks. We were made by the media to believe in something. I say to your parents, do not worry. There are no more your kids and our kids. Your kids are safe here today in Belgrade and always. And that was for me, symbolically very important message. I don't think that this will resolve any issues, but for many people, they made statements. For the first time, we feel like we live in the same country, you know? So there is you know, if you are a minority, you don't like many things, but you protest against this corruption, you know, and this authoritarianism. It means that you still have some idea that you want to live in a better state. And we have even in Albanian communities in the south protest despite the recent situation where some hooligans are shouting in the evening, they're shouting Vučiću Šiptaru, like which is a derogatory name for Albanians. Again, I urge everyone, look at the ground, don't identify these night hooligans with the protest in general. Okay? In all protests we had from 1990s onwards, we always had football fans who were here and there. They're not representative of the Serbian population. Two big meetings ended up without one single injury, without one incident, without broken anything in Belgrade, and even we clean, the students clean after the protest, streets are clear. This is what happened. Okay, sorry.
Yeah, no, that's excellent. That's what I was actually waiting for you to, or rather for both of you to kind of point to. And this is quite new. And that's why there is such a strong optimism and strong, if I may say, even surprise, like of that health that people can now finally see in the Serbian, among Serbian young people who are calling for just better life for everyone, not just for one group or the other group, but better life for everyone. And that's quite refreshing. That's why everybody's trying to understand what's going on and, you know, to kind of have a reason for hope. But we have Svetlusha patiently waiting to ask, I guess, to ask a question. So Svetlusha, go ahead.
Thank you, Mirsad. And Sasha and Sabina, thank you very much. Again, this discussion was really necessary, and I think we would need to reconvene again because we are slowly running the time. There is so much to discuss and so much to explain to the broader audience, and we will make sure at MIRI to do that. As Mirsad says, we are planning a conversation with the members of Slovak national minority from Bački Petrovac, Mirsad, not Bečki.
I'm sorry.
Vienna Petrovac, although it was maybe before Vojvodina joined Republic of Serbia, but yes, that was something
Bečki, for us, English
that changes a lot. That changes a lot. So that was with you see those kind of unconscious mistakes happen even to the best ones. But I wanted to make a few comments, if you allow me, on what was said. I listened very carefully, and I see that we did not have to even prepare the questions because Sasha and Sabina they spoke everything what we actually spoke before with Mirsad, what we need to cover. But I would go to one important thing that both Sasha and Sabina mentioned, and it's elections. Of course, totally agree with you, with Sasha. The power is vested in the citizens, and they choose they should choose their representative in a free and fair elections. So that is the only way how to start the change. To start the change, we have to have elections, and not only preliminary elections, but they have to be free, fair, which has not happened in Serbia for, I would say, even decades. So, and this is the biggest problem, but of course, we have to take this way. Sabina was mentioning this, yes, Organization for Security Cooperation in Europe monitored the last election. They reported many, as they say, procedural irregularities like voters buying, group voting, forcing people working in a state institution to vote for the ruling party and so on. But I think it's they use really nice words for it, but it's actually the elections are not legal. These people do not have legitimacy, and that is something what I want to also, which connects majority with minorities. Many years ago, before Corona, I was on Sasha's institute when was on the conference organized by the Anton Group. And that time, which was really, I don't know now, 6-7 years ago, I already was, I was doing research on the national minority councils of Slovak national minority, but it can be generalized. Already that time, we had documented election fraud to minority councils. And I was speaking vocally about that this cannot happen. We had identity frauds when the ruling party, Serbian Progressive Party, sent the people of different ethnicity to register as minorities to overvote. The problem with national minority councils, the second problem, they should be autonomous. They should provide cultural autonomy. They are not autonomous, they are co-opted. All the leaders in power are co-opted by regime, and they, as Sabina said, they serve to the regime. And even that time I question whom they represent. They don't have legitimacy and what kind of interest they represent if they are co-opted with the ruling party. So and I would even go to speculate that the ruling party was testing everything would happen later in general election on minority councils. You know, the registers of the voters, the names, and on small scale, and then they did in a big. So this was a comment. So yes, elections are the most important. We may have to make sure that they are free and fair and legal. And then Sasha, well, you went back about this the protest of students in the 90s. I was thinking all the time what is the similar to this, and one point is that yes, students that time had the support from the abroad, from the West, and not only support symbolical but like material support. And that's why I use that quote from the poem Protest, that somehow it's not comprehensive now. Why would EU member states not speak about this matter, what's happening? And of course they make some EU made some statements like allow people to protest, but why they don't make some critical statement like to cut the funds, to stop negotiation talks and everything? Why they don't force regime to stop violence and everything? So this is not very understandable. And here is my question: what do you think? Why is this now happening? Why you think that this regime is tolerated from the, let's say, European Union, and also and can the protest really be successful without the support from the West? And I have also, if I may, last question. It is about the past. Sabina really nicely explained how there are problems lasting here between in Serbian society since the 90s, and even Sasha mentioned that at the end about this story about war veteran, what has happened. But I'm wondering, I was expecting that you will say that the war veteran actually apologized, that he said sorry, not that he said, don't worry, we won't beat your children again. But I was expecting that he would apologize. And this is a question for both of you. I wanted to leave the difficult question for the end, but the question is, can we move forward in Serbia all together if we don't address the past 90s, past war atrocities, if we don't take a stand on the genocide in Srebrenica, if we don't take a stand on all the ethnic violence in Novi Pazar, in Vojvodina, so if we don't also make, and also not on the past and for the future, do you think that we can have a better future also if everybody don't agree on the values now, as you said, EU values, democracy, human minority rights, rule of law, and so on? So thank you very much that you gave me floor for this.
Thank you, Svetlusha. Yeah, I think well, both of the guests can respond, although Sasha always was basically pointing to this kind of new reason for hope, as we were mentioning, and Sabina was talking about that. But go ahead, Sabina, you want to go start first, and then Sasha, or vice versa, whoever feels to respond to Svetlusha.
If I may, because I already had some top-ups to Sasha's comments, and I'll try to tie them all in together to go first. When we think about the EU and why there aren't EU flags, I would first and foremost say that the EU's ambiguous engagement with Serbia is not new. We have this concept of stabilitocracy, where EU basically supports leaders who provide stability, and then we are going to turn blind eyes on democracy as long as the state is stable, as long as they are integrated within the current, let's say, even if you want, economic, financial policies that are promoted by the EU, whether you want to start from the crisis 2009 and the neoliberal reforms, the financial loans, austerity policies, etc. Then we can talk about stability. In the most recent context, we can even talk about securing lithium. That's whole other issues that's very problematic for EU's views and support of regime in Serbia. But what we are seeing with the protest, and it's no surprise that there are not EU flags, because students are very, how should I say, very clearly aware of this silent support of the EU, of the regime, but they are not disillusioned with the values, and that has been shown with the cycling to Strasbourg, with going to Brussels. But what I'm seeing here is Europeanization in substance. Basically, they're saying we don't care, accession, no accession. Accession is not even, is it even important anymore, considering what Brussels is doing, Brussels, Belgrade directly. But we do want this kind of society. We do want, European society to live and exist in Serbia, and whether we enter or don't enter the EU, that's a whole other debate. And as Sasha rightfully pointed out, now it's even a question whether, the white population wants to enter the EU, considering this kind of dynamic. Talking about elections and the EU and what happens if the protests are not supported by the EU, well, we have to say that formally EU cannot meddle in the elections, right? They're there and they're supposed to support whatever the government, whatever the people decide. However, never ever underestimate the ability and adaptability of authoritarian regime. We don't know who will vote in these elections. We don't know, we had cases previously of Vučić bringing voters from Republika Srpska, the running joke that all dead people, or everybody who migrated, everybody votes and votes for a particular option. If we want to translate that on the minority context, what's a very interesting development, and for me it's very, very telling of the dynamic with minorities, basically the funding to the municipality of Novi Pazar was cut off recently. So none of the, how should I say, officials, none of the local government officials received salary over the past month. And this is basically a punishment for not co-opting the rest of the minority groups, for them being so prominent in the protests. So basically those who were supposed to deliver for the regimes, the particular party representatives, particular local powerful figures, did not manage to, how should I say, to deliver, to silence the minority, the wider minority group. So this is, again, I'm going to say that this is quite telling. When we talk about the minority councils, what's interesting in the Bosniak community, basically the minority council is led by people who are not loyal to these parties who are part of the regime. So we have very different dynamic among particular Bosniak parties, and then the ones who stand in the council because they are not part of the quote-unquote right party. But that's why the whole municipality was punished and nobody got salary. And as you've said, that there's so many techniques not to be underestimated. But what's very interesting, will it bring elections? Will elections bring change? I think we need to take it with a pinch of salt. Yes, I want to be very optimistic. What's a very good sign, what Sasha mentioned now, is that Vučić this time doesn't want elections. And earlier, when the election started, he was offering elections to students as a solution. And that is telling us that back then, at the beginning, he was feeling very comfortable and he knew he's going to win them and he was comfortable to offer it as a solution. But students then were not keen on elections as the next step. Now students have their own views. They even want to nominate people within their circles. And now Vučić is rejecting, pushing back elections. So that maybe is a good, promising side. But there is the other side that we need to, again, take with pinch of salt. The reason why protests are so successful is exactly because of the decentralized, depersonalized, super democratic structure that they run. And that's basically what I think that's what allowed them to last so long and what didn't allow the regime to co-opt them in. But when it comes to elections, you know very well, then you need to be very kind of hierarchical, organized, structured to, you know, jump through the hoops. So that will be now a challenge. Let's see. I don't want to be too optimistic or pessimistic. And just to address your last point about reconciliation, whether protests can bring reconciliation, this is something that to me personally is very interesting, and I'm, you know, hoping to do some empirical research. But yes, protests create great solidarity. We see people coming together. We see veterans, you know, from all talking about our children. But let's not forget that when we have protests, we do have this cross-ethnic solidarity. But protests are usually future-oriented. You know, we have a current problem, which is we now have a common enemy, which is the regime, the corrupt regime. And we mobilize our togetherness, our joint identity against this, how should I say, common enemy, which is the regime. But protests as such, and again, they're future-oriented and they have a different common enemy. But protests do not go very much in revisiting the past. It's just not the nature of the protests. You need to, you know, go on the streets and do something else, bring a different tomorrow. And Svetlusha, you rightfully pointed out, the question is whether this means reconciliation. Apologizing, I think that would be a bit too optimistic. What are we talking about? What are the topics we are revisiting? How are we addressing those topics? Is this maybe going to create or to open some small cracks for a potential further discussion? Hopefully, I mean, I do want to be optimistic. What's maybe a positive change is we see much, or at least generational change, this new generation Z, who is much more focused on a civic identity. We are citizens, we have rights and responsibilities, and we want the state to respect our rights, and we all mobilize together to question that when it's not delivered properly. But the previous generation, not necessarily. There are still those ethnic focus leftovers. So I think that's maybe for the future to tell us. I'll stop here.
Well, thank you. All right. Thank you, Sabina. I am actually optimistic, unlike you and Svetlusha, or rather you are cautiously optimistic. Svetlusha is pointing to good questions, but I am optimistic. I think there is some new generation coming, and what I saw in the protests from the distance, I have to, admit, I do see reasons for hope because, there are some quite new messages that they're projecting. But before we address the question of Janko, he posted in a group chat. Aleksandar or Sasha, you want to comment on Svetlusha's questions and things?
Well, preferably, I'd like to have like a whole weekend to address Svetlusha's questions. The fact about the flags, I keep saying, it's not like students don't wear EU flags. There are no flags at all on this protest. This has been the principle from the onset. You know, no LGBT, no Russian flags, no EU flags, no Serbian Orthodox Church flags, you know, no Martians are coming flags, no flags, just Serbian flags, because this is like a issue of dealing with corruption in the state. So it's not pro-EU, anti-EU. This is simply, there are no flags, not just some are left out. This is how it's going on. This is important to understand. Now, why no concern? You see Janko's here comment, which is very, very, I think, representative of basically nicely put in words what is my impression as well, that this EU skepticism is, of course, blossoming when you have such ambiguity from the EU. Why not? I'm afraid within 1 minute to respond. It's because EU bureaucrats really look only after very specific interests, you know, and have a very short outlook. They think that Vučić is someone who is delivering on Kosovo. Let's keep Vučić so we can always strong arm him, so that, you know, who knows what will happen. You know, why take the chances of supporting Serbian students in some kind of crazy direct democracy initiative when who knows what will happen, you know? So that's one reason. Another reason is, and it's clear, it's lithium. Serbia has deposits. Rio Tinto invested. Vučić promises publicly, and, you know, you have statements in German press, in the media, you know, promises, I'm the only one who can deliver that, you know, and clearly overwhelming majority at the moment in Serbia is against lithium mining. Now, I try to analyze the situation separately to say maybe this is lucrative in the long run for Serbia, but within the certain, as the situation is now, it will be detrimental. So please have some faith in young people. If you see a good initiative, put aside petty interests for the moment. You know, we all can profit. Everyone can profit from this, but I don't think this is how bureaucrats think. Can it succeed without can it lead to real transformation? I am ambiguous about it. I don't think any small country with such limited resources has really resources, has the strength to have like a genuine transformation that will lead to a lasting democratic institutional reform without a vocal EU support. And it's enough to have joint statements, it's enough to pose sanctions to certain people, to be clear that these guys are autocrats and we do not want to recognize them as great. The last thing is about the dealing with the past. As someone who criticized Serbian nationalism for over 20 years, okay? I think I've learned a thing or two. I think I have some credits, so I can say it. Let us not, I read a lot about it, let us not overburden the protesters today, okay? It's like someone is in debt, he's developing a small business, doing good, and you say, okay, you owe me 100,000 euros, you know, like you broke the back. This can lead to settling of situation. I can say, as I said, like someone who criticized it, the ideal situation would be that we have dealing with the past in Serbia, but also in Bosnia, in Croatia, in Kosovo. You know, I see Kosovo intellectuals being totally overwhelmed at the moment with these paroles and reading it as Serbia is going totally right. Meanwhile, we have Hague Tribunal court about the Kosovo elite crimes, which they are not addressing. So ideally, we would have dealing with the past in the future by the new generation of these young people who don't have these, they don't feel this weight on the shoulders as the previous generation does. I will just conclude with reminding that in certain years, Serbia has a declaration condemning Srebrenica massacre, where it says clearly, this is by Serbian National Assembly, in line with the Hague Tribunal verdict. And it wasn't a problem for years in the Serbian public discourse, now it became a problem. So there is something that, that can ease tensions, that can provide situation, but we would also profit from the solidarity from the neighbors. I would never in my right mind think of like pinning on the position of Serbians in Montenegro when the protests were all going, or speaking about Serbian minorities' position in Macedonia when they were against Gruevski. This is, and I think common people feel that we have a joint cause. Any country in the region deposing their autocrat is doing a favor for all of us, for the benefit of our the way that we live in our countries, those of us who still remain there. So I thank you for the opportunity. Anyone who is a Serbian citizen, once there are elections, will host you. Come and vote, and that is all and nothing less than that we need to make steps further.
Well, thank you, Dr. Pavlović. Yes, you basically saying one thing at a time. We can't really address all the problems at the same time. But there is one more dimension that Janko posted in his question, and that's the dimension that although there is no support from European Union, he's pointing that as a counter argument that Russia is not is not involved either, so that it doesn't help if you go left or if you go to the west or to the east. So therefore, looks like the notion among the protesters is that it is really something that they have to resolve on their own. And now the question becomes the capacity to do so, as you pointed. Can the population of Serbia do that on its own? Can the population of Serbia, address all these big questions that of the recent past, such as Srebrenica genocide and other hot, important issues that you also said used to be kind of somewhat going toward reconciliation, but then somehow it took some U-turn, and now we are basically back at that old positions where reconciliation is. Even conversations about reconciliations are hard, but again, there are reasons for optimism. So now let's just briefly conclude, both of you, reasons for optimism and pessimism, if you can, in a very kind of brief way. So, Dr. Pavlović, you want to, what are your hope for the future? Or what is the pessimism and concern that you have regarding how this will be resolved?
Optimism, reasons for optimism. All the polls show lasting dissatisfaction of majority of Serbian people with their government. Okay, so in any form of even any elections resembling elections, okay, are certain to indicate this change, certainly in all the major urban centers and very likely abroad. If the government is faced with what we saw previously, with one unified list, or the second best scenario is two separately, but one list supported by students, and then with all other members providing solidarity for it. If this is possible, this is where my optimism lies. If this is done, we will have something like transitional government, which is temporary, made of figures who are not professional politicians, and after that we will transition into some kind of better political system. Not great, but that's reasons for optimism. Reasons for pessimism, if you don't mind, I spoke a lot. I'd rather not about that.
Fair enough. So you are just optimistic. I am sharing your optimism, Sasha. I am also really optimistic. As I said already, there were some quite some quite nice things that I see now happening in Serbia, and I am really hoping that this new generation will figure the way forward. Yes, Sabina, reasons for hope or reasons for optimism, concern. What is your concluding remarks?
I'll start with the pessimism so that I end on a positive note. So, as a student of authoritarianism, again, I'm going to underline that, when you have deeply entrenched authoritarian system, it shouldn't be underestimated. They can be very adaptable, very innovative. They can come up with various techniques of rigging elections, of controlling different strata of society, of institutions. They control the media, so they have much wider outreach. Unfortunately, still control the police and security forces. But I would talk in the optimism about what's good also about the student protest in that regard. And of course, we mentioned the silent EU support. And if you want, even a very different world we are in. It's very different from the 90s. There is not such, wide support of democracy funded by the US, by the EU. We have Ukraine, we have Palestine, and maybe some of the leaders want to, keep other problems at minimum or keep their engagement at minimum. So those are the, how should I say, as a student of authoritarian regimes, that's where my pessimism comes from. But to talk on a positive note, for me, the first reason is kind of self-evident. Like Serbian protest for me is just the sheer witnessing of breaking the political lethargy, this belief, though we can't do anything about this, nobody cares, everybody anyway wants to go out of here, to move out. The young people who are, telling something very different, who are very deeply engaged, who talk about our state, our institutions, our future. For me, that in itself is like a huge reason for optimism to begin with. But also we can talk about, we mentioned the cross-ethnic mobilization, the much wider identification with the state from groups that, never, not that they didn't want to, they were sometimes never even given the right to co-identify with the state. Their otherness was always more prioritized than their, how should I say, their togetherness. And another positive is maybe this gradual switch to more civic identity, where we are more concerned who are we as citizens, who are our leaders, and how this question of who are we goes somehow for me hand in hand with what are our values. And that means how are we going to behave, and then how are we going to treat our elected representatives. So for me, I want to be optimistic and to say that there is a gradual switch that Generation Z kind of brought and kind of managed to spill it over their parents, their, how should I say, older generations across society, and prioritizing something different, not ethnic belonging, not the loyalty of one of us and everybody else is an enemy, but no, it's our state, our values, our children, our future. And maybe to just tie in when I talked about media control, etc., I'm very pleased to see how students have these very well-developed networks, very hardworking students who go even in small villages to talk about why they are protesting, to explain to people, to kind of counter all these authoritarian mechanisms with very innovative ways of reaching out to the wider public. So I'm definitely keeping my fingers crossed.
Okay, I hear you. Excellent. Thank you both. It looks like, actually the problems in Serbia are much more widespread problems. Everything that both you, Dr. Pačariz and Dr. Pavlović spoke about it, we now see in other places. Even here where I am in the United States, we see that, these issues are kind of really widespread. And as some scholars like Charles Tilly was talking, maybe this is that crisis of liberalism where we have to kind of renegotiate some of the issues that we have. But Serbia being the really important country in that region, it is a key to many issues that will help the whole region move forward. So we are all optimistic. And with that, let's conclude our today's conversation. I will remind you that we're going to have a soon conversation in Slovak about Bački Petrovac, and that I hope all of you join us for that one as well. I see that Janko posted one more comment, again, as someone who is on the ground from the start and continue to be active. Strongest case for pessimism is that the ruling regime has created a symbiotic relations between organized crime and state and police. This is very evident since August. They have a lot of serious tools and weapons at their disposal, and they're increasingly not holding back at their use. Meanwhile, there is no one you can turn to say, hey, look at this, what they're doing. The regime and their partners are protecting their livelihoods and will do so with impunity. Excellent. I mean, Janko, thank you for your comments. Very, very useful. As somebody who is on the ground, we can see the sentiment from your comments are that people feel left alone and not supported in their, how you say, legitimate demands. Well, we will continue conversation, and thank you again for all of you for joining us today for this important, how you say, effort to understand it. And I hope to see you soon. Svetlusha, our director, was recently at GlobSec conference, and she already asked these questions right there at that big forum, and she has something else to add to before we conclude. So Svetlusha, go ahead.
Yeah, thank you, Mirsad. I know that we stayed long, but I just want to say once again, thank you to Sabina and Sasha and to Mirsad for putting this seminar together, all participants for their time. And I hope that you enjoyed this event. Definitely, we have to talk more about this. And at the end, if I can still read from the poem that I started, it is really great poem. I recommend everybody to search for it, or I will put in the chat, and to finish with the smart words by Elena Wheeler-Wilcox. To sin by silence when we should protest makes cowards out of men. The human race has climbed on protest. Had no voice been raised against injustice, ignorance, and lust, the Inquisition yet would serve the law, and guillotines decide our least disputes. The few who dare must speak and speak again to right the wrongs of many. Thank you very much, and I wish you a nice day. Goodbye.
Thank you. Thank you very much.